On May 29, 1943, at RAF Alconbury in England, 7 YB-40 Flying Fortresses from the 327th Squadron of the 92nd Bomb Group were lined up and ready. Their crews were going through final checks before heading out on their first combat mission. These specially modified bombers, loaded with as many as 16.50 caliber machine guns, were part of a last-ditch effort by the U.S. Army Air Forces to fix a major issue. Bombers flying to Germany were getting torn apart without long-range fighter escorts. But instead of solving the problem, the YB-40s exposed a serious weakness in the B-17's original design, something that had already cost many American airmen their lives. The flaw seemed simple but proved deadly. In the B-17, 2 waist gunners stood across from each other in a narrow section of the plane, each man a machine gun sticking out of an open window. During intense combat at 25,000 feet, where it could be minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit, while bundled in heavy flight suits, body armor, and parachutes, the gunners kept bumping into each other while trying to shoot at incoming German fighters. In the chaos, oxygen hoses were knocked loose, leading to unconsciousness and death in just minutes. Ammo belts got tangled, guns jammed, and gunners were left helpless, not because of enemy fire, but because the aircraft layout made it nearly impossible to fight back effectively. Over the next 18 months, lessons learned in combat drove major design changes that turned the B-17 into one of the toughest bombers of the war. One key upgrade was moving the waist gunner positions, so they were staggered, giving each gunner space to work. This change alone saved thousands of lives and helped the U.S. gain air control over Nazi Germany. Early 1943, stats were grim. The 8th Air Force's own research team found that an average B-17 lasted only 11 missions before being shot down. Crews needed to complete 25 missions to finish a tour. That meant only about 27% of airmen were expected to survive. This wasn't just a number. It meant empty beds in crew huts, boxes of personal items shipped home, and new teams arriving from the U.S. faster than they could be fully trained. The situation had been getting worse since bombing missions began in August 1942. Before the war, military planners believed that formations of heavily armed bombers could protect themselves in daylight attacks, even without fighter support. That theory was developed at the Air Corps Tactical School in Alabama, but it had never been tested in real war conditions, and it didn't hold up. German pilots flying Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt Bf 109s quickly figured out how to get around the bombers' defenses, especially at the waist gun positions. Those positions were especially vulnerable. The B-17 models E and F had 2 gunners using flexible .50 caliber machine guns through side openings about 2 by 3 feet wide. The area where they stood was less than 10 feet across and narrowed toward the rear of the plane. Packed into that tight space, wearing bulky cold weather gear and trying to track fast fighter planes, the gunners kept getting in each other's way. Things got even harder at altitude. At 25,000 feet, temperatures were brutal, and 200 miles per hour winds blasted through the open windows. Any exposed skin could freeze in seconds. Ice-clogged guns, oxygen gear, and ammo feeds. Even with layers of gloves, including heated mittens, gunners sometimes had to take them off to clear jams, and many suffered frostbite as a result. Combat reports from early 1943 showed the problem getting worse. On January 27th, during the first U.S. bombing raid on Germany, waist gunners said they couldn't hit enemy fighters because they kept interfering with each other. On March 6th, during a mission to hit ball-bearing factories, several B-17s were left undefended when the waist gunners got tangled up during sharp turns to dodge attacks. The YB-40 program was launched in September 1942 as a temporary fix until long-range fighters could be developed. At the time, bombers flying deep into German territory had no protection once their short-range P-47 escorts had to turn back at the border. The P-51 Mustang wasn't ready yet. So engineers worked with Lockheed's Vega division to turn standard B-17FS into heavily armed YB-40 escorts. The changes were significant. They added a second top turret where the radio operator used to be. The waist guns were doubled up. A new turret was mounted under the nose, and the bomb bay was turned into a giant ammo storage area holding 11,000 rounds. Extra armor was added to protect the crew. The first 13 YB-40s landed at RAF Alconbury in early May 1943. They were assigned only to the 327th Squadron of the 92nd Bomb Group. But right away, training exposed a problem. The upgraded twin waist guns, meant to double firepower, actually made the cramped space even worse. During training flights, gunners kept bumping into each other and snagging their gear. Their first combat mission came on May 29, 1943, aimed at submarine bases in Saint-Nazaire, France. 7 YB-40s flew alongside 96 standard B-17s. But once the B-17s dropped their bombs, the YB-40s, still carrying heavy loads, couldn't keep up. Worse, gun crews struggled to work together, especially at the waist. After the mission, debriefings showed the gunners hadn't been able to respond properly to German fighters coming in from the sides. Then on June 22, 1943, things turned tragic during a raid on a synthetic rubber plant in Hulst, Germany. One YB-40, tail number 42 to 5,735, was shot down. Its waist gunners couldn't fight back effectively because they were getting in each other's way. Investigations showed this wasn't just bad luck. It was a recurring problem across the board. The after-action reports were sent to several different commands. In Dayton, Ohio, the Air Technical Service Command began reviewing the tactical failures. At Boeing's facility in Seattle, lead engineer Edward Curtis Wells pulled a team together to go through the reports. At the same time, Douglas Aircraft in Tulsa started testing changes directly on aircraft. But the most focused work happened at United Airlines Modification Center in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which was built specifically to upgrade bombers based on field feedback. The breakthrough fix was surprisingly simple. Move the waist gun windows so they weren't directly across from each other. The left gunner's window was shifted forward by about 3 feet, and the right one moved back the same amount. This gave each gunner their own space, so they could move, fire, and reload without interference. It was a small design change, but it made a big difference. The first B-17 with these staggered waist windows was tested in combat in early July 1943, and the results were immediate. Gunners said it was much easier to track and shoot at targets. Reports of equipment tangles dropped almost to zero. Still, the open windows meant the crew had to deal with extreme cold and wind at high altitude. So, the full solution included enclosed waist positions with plexiglass panels and rotating gun mounts. This setup, known as the Cheyenne configuration, turned the waist area into an actual combat station. Douglas Aircraft added the staggered waist windows to late B-17F models starting in August 1943. Boeing added the change to their new B-17G model right away, with the first one rolling off the line on August 30th. Lockheed Vega quickly followed with the same updates. But the B-17G didn't just have better waist guns. It included every important improvement based on real combat experience from 1943. It featured a new Bendix chin turret to protect the front and an upgraded tail gunner position with wider windows and a better view. Altogether, these updates made it the most heavily armed bomber in the war. Production numbers showed how urgent the changes were. Boeing's Seattle plant built 8,680 B-17GS. Douglas and Long Beach made 2,395 more. Lockheed Vega added another 2,250. Every single one included the staggered waist window setup, along with other key upgrades driven by frontline feedback. By fall 1943, the results spoke for themselves. On October 8th, during missions over Bremen and Vedsac, B-17GS with the new waist positions scored more fighter kills and suffered fewer losses than older B-17F models still in use. That's exactly what the changes were designed to do. Then came October 14th, known as Black Thursday. During the second raid on Schweinfurt, 60 bombers were lost out of 291 sent. But later analysis showed the newer B-17GS had lower loss rates than the older FS. The new defensive features were making a real difference, even in the war's most brutal air battles. German after-action reports confirmed the impact of the American upgrades. In October 1943, Major Hans Philipp, who led a fighter wing, noted that U.S. bombers were now much tougher to hit. Waist gunners were delivering accurate, steady fire, tracking enemy planes throughout their attack runs without hesitation. The Luftwaffe had to adjust. They introduced a Werfer Granit 21 rocket launcher for long-range attacks and developed heavily armored Sternbach assault fighters specifically to break through B-17 formations. The fact that these new weapons were needed showed just how effective the American modifications had become. By December 1943, these improvements began influencing high-level strategy. The 8th Air Force started planning deeper bombing missions, knowing their aircraft had a better chance of making it home. General Ira Eaker told General Henry Hap Arnold that the changes had significantly boosted their ability to carry out long-range strikes. The upgrades didn't just affect the planes, they reshaped training too. Gunnery schools updated their programs to teach techniques suited to the new staggered waist gun setups. Instructors at Kingman Army Airfield in Arizona noted that with the new layout, gunners could now use deflection shooting properly, increasing their accuracy. Other bombers also adopted the changes. Later versions of the B-24 Liberator included staggered waist guns, and the B-29 Superfortress, still under development at the time, featured remotely operated turrets that protected crews by eliminating exposure to open air entirely. On January 11, 1944, the results were clear. In a massive strike against German aircraft factories, 600 bombers took off. Even though they didn't have full fighter escort, losses were manageable, and most of the aircraft lost were older B-17F models. The newer B-17GS performed far better. February's Big Week campaign cemented the strategic shift. Over 3,000 bombers hit German aircraft production facilities. Despite heavy German resistance, U.S. losses were kept in check. The upgraded defenses on the B-17s had clearly shifted the balance. When General James Doolittle took command in January 1944, he saw the improved B-17GS could now hold their own. This allowed escort fighters to break off and go after enemy planes more aggressively instead of sticking close to the bombers. That new tactic hit the Luftwaffe hard. On March 4, 1944, the U.S. launched its first daylight bombing raid on Berlin. 730 B-17s and B-24s hit the Nazi capital. The 95th Bomb Group, flying B-17GS, lost just 3 planes while taking down 17 enemy fighters, even though they faced about 200 German aircraft. By spring 1944, the 8th Air Force could now carry out continuous bombing missions. Sending 1,000 bombers at once was no longer a desperate gamble. It was a regular strategy. The improved survival rates made it possible to begin systematically destroying German factories, oil supplies, and transportation networks. During the D-Day invasion, the transformation was on full display. Over 2,000 bomber sorties were flown in support of the landings. Despite strong German resistance, only 26 bombers were lost in total. The B-17G had proven itself as a dependable combat aircraft. By summer 1944, the Luftwaffe was in serious trouble. American bombers were more durable than ever, and the U.S. could replace any losses almost immediately. The upgraded defenses created a snowball effect. More bombers survived, forcing Germany to commit more fighters, which led to heavier losses for the Luftwaffe. The human side of the story showed in the mission stats. In early 1943, making it through 25 missions seemed like a long shot. By mid-1944, crews were regularly completing 35 mission tours. Survival odds had more than doubled. In August 1944, German technical teams examined a down B-17G and confirmed what American crews already knew. The staggered waist gun setup made side attacks much harder. The B-17, once an easy target, had become a serious threat. Production kept pushing forward. At Boeing's Plant 2, 44,000 workers were building up to 16 B-17GS every day at the peak. What made the real difference wasn't just numbers. It was how fast the U.S. could take lessons from combat and turn them into better aircraft. The B-17 was evolving faster than the enemy could keep up. Then in October 1944, B-17GS faced off against a new challenge, German Mi-262 jet fighters. Even though the jets were faster, the bomber's waist gunners still managed to hit several of them. The upgrades proved that even against cutting-edge tech, solid defenses still worked. On December 24, 1944, Christmas Eve, the U.S. launched its largest air raid of the war. Over 2,300 bombers hit targets in western Germany. Despite tough resistance, including jet attacks, the loss rate was lower than much smaller missions had seen back in 1943. By February 3, 1945, nearly 1,000 B-17s flew over Berlin. Germany threw everything it had at them, but only 21 bombers were lost. Just 2 years earlier, losses like that would have been devastating. Now, they were manageable. The last B-17G came off the line on April 13, 1945. It carried the serial number 44 to 85,974 and represented the peak of all the wartime design improvements. Less than 2 weeks later, on April 25th, the final bombing mission took place. B-17GS hit arms factories in Czechoslovakia without losing a single aircraft. The design changes had done their job. The painful lessons of earlier missions had paid off. After the war, the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey confirmed what many already believed. The B-17's improvements, especially the defensive changes, were key to gaining air superiority. The staggered waist guns, combined with other upgrades, made a huge difference in how many aircraft and crews made it back. From a cost perspective, the investment paid off. The U.S. spent around $20 million on B-17 modifications. In return, they avoided losing about 800 bombers, worth nearly $190 million, not to mention the trained crews aboard. The return on investment was over 10 to 1, but the B-17's legacy didn't end with World War II. The changes made to its design helped shape how military aircraft were built from then on. Crew safety, workspace layout, and firing angles became essential parts of aircraft engineering. These ideas are now standard in military aviation. Veterans often talked about the importance of the upgrades. At reunions, waist gunners especially highlighted how much safer the B-17G felt compared to earlier versions. Something as simple as moving the gun windows made the difference between surviving and not coming home. Today, only 12 B-17GS are still flying. People who visit them often notice the staggered waist windows, physical proof of how real battle experience led to real innovation. They learn how fast thinking, flexible factories, and smart design choices helped win the air war. General Carl Spaatz summed it up best. The B-17G wasn't built in a lab. It was built in combat. Every improvement came from air crews who faced deadly missions and pushed for better equipment. The staggered waist guns and other changes turned a vulnerable aircraft into one of the most effective bombers in history. That transformation shows what made the difference in the war. While Germany built some of the best single aircraft, the U.S. had something more powerful: the ability to find problems, fix them fast, and roll out those changes across thousands of planes. The B-17 that helped bring down Nazi Germany was shaped by the experience and sacrifice of thousands of American airmen. Every improvement was tested in combat. Every change was earned. And something as small as shifting a gunner's window helped save lives and win the war. Simple fixes, huge impact, victory through adaptation. That's the real story of how America won the air war over Europe. The story of the B-17G is about more than machinery. It's about the people, engineers, factory workers, instructors, and air crews who saw problems and pushed for solutions. It's about a nation that didn't just build planes, but built them better, smarter, and faster in response to real combat experience. Every dent, every debrief, every mission flown contributed to a weapon that evolved in real time. What made the B-17G different wasn't just the firepower or armor. It was the ability to adapt. The staggered waist gun positions, enclosed gunner stations, chin turrets, and dozens of other upgrades didn't come from a single blueprint. They came from listening to the men who flew into danger day after day. They came from identifying weaknesses and fixing them before the enemy could exploit them again. By 1944, that adaptability paid off. Missions that once seemed suicidal became survivable. What was once a long shot, completing 25 missions, became a routine 35. And when the final bombing run flew in April 1945 without a single loss, it was a quiet but powerful victory that proved how far the Flying Fortress had come. The B-17G wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. It just had to get better, fast. And it did. That's what turned it into a symbol of resilience and ingenuity. It wasn't a miracle of engineering on day one. It became great through trial, error, and relentless improvement. And that's the legacy that lasts. Today, when you stand beneath one of the few surviving B-17GS, it's not just a piece of metal history. It's proof of what happens when a nation puts its full weight behind its people, giving them the tools, trust, and resources to solve problems and save lives. The B-17G helped turn the tide of the air war not because it was invincible, but because it kept evolving. And in that evolution, we see the real American advantage, the ability to adapt, innovate, and never stop improving. That's how you win a war. And that's why the Flying Fortress still flies in memory in museums and in the hearts of those who know its story.